Welcome back to another episode of the Life Sciences Professional Podcast. Today I have a special guest, Marc Champagne, who is an expert in mental fitness. And you've probably never heard of that before, neither have I, but you're going to learn a lot about the benefits of mental fitness and what Marc helps individuals, corporations about the benefits of mental fitness. He has a podcast, he's written a book, and he does come from the pharmaceutical industry. He was there for 10 years. So please help me welcome Marc to our podcast, and I hope you'll enjoy this session and everything that Marc has. Hi, Marc. Well, thanks very much for joining us. I know that our guests will be very excited to hear everything that you have to share from your background and how you've helped organizations. And you come from, the pharmaceutical industry. You were there 10 years as well. You work with businesses, both, SMEs and large corporations, as well as startups, founders that are, looking for investors and so forth. So I think you have a huge amount of experience in terms of helping companies overcome, mindset and, getting into the right frame in terms of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. So I'm excited to have you share your information and your experiences for our listeners. But, first and foremost, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
And you and I, spoke in the past a couple times, and, I've always learned a lot from you, and we share a lot of the same thought processes, obviously, and we both come from the industry. You're pharmaceutical and I'm from the medical device. And we're both entrepreneurs and we know what that's like, right?
Yeah.
Just start a business and, to go through, the trials and tribulations of that and what entrepreneurship is all about. But if you don't mind, the audience doesn't know you like I do, right? And if you could share some information about yourself, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, first of all, Linda, thank you for inviting me and having me. I echo those same sentiments whenever we chat. It's always a blast. So I will do my best to share what I've picked up on this wild ride of life that we're all on, and hopefully leave people with some practices that they can implement right away in a relatable fashion. So yeah, I mean, the short answer, I guess, to your question is, and it took a while to figure out what felt the most aligned and right in terms of describing at least what I'm doing, and I landed on this term, which is called a mental fitness strategist. And I suspect many people listening were probably like, well, what is that? Because I was trying to think, like, I don't consider myself a coach. I don't consider myself a guide or anything like that. I come from, like you mentioned, from the pharma world. I went through a lot of the different positions, starting in sales and market research and analytics, but I was always trying to get to product management and brand strategy, which is where I ended up at the tail end of my career in that space. And I loved it. I love strategy. So when I left to get into mental fitness and helping first myself really just take control and lead my own mind so that I can then, do the work and be able to show up for others, the combination of those two things felt really right, because I think we can probably all resonate or agree that any business, or if you're working on a brand, there's usually a plan. We're like, we're here right now. We want to be at this location by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year, by the end of the 5 years. Like, we have multiple plans for different time periods, but we often don't have a plan for our mind or a strategy for our mind, which is the thing that literally, keeps us going day in and day out. And that's where those kind of two terms as mental fitness and figuring out a strategy for our mind, where those two things came together, is kind of the intersect of at least my worlds.
And when you first started out, what was it that you were doing? I believe it was an app. So maybe you could touch on that a little bit, because I think that was really cool.
Well, thank you. It was, again, a really interesting experience on this whole ride. And it all came from basically personal experience, studying the minds of people that were at least inspiring to me when I was in the life sciences world, because I started in sales, and I remember thinking, okay, we're all at that time, you'll remember this, like people were hired in batches essentially, right? And they're all flown out or wherever. And you do like 3-4 weeks of training together and so forth. And I remember being in Montreal, where Novartis's head office was for Canada, and thinking, okay, this is a sales function. We're essentially all being trained, depending on like where we're coming from, a little bit different, but for the most part, coming out with the same set of skills. And I'm seeing like these targets and whatnot and incentives. I'm like, well, how am I going to stand out from this group if we're all kind of being trained in the same way? And for whatever reason, something sparked there. I still don't really know what caused this spark, but I'm forever grateful for it, because what kind of came to my mind was, well, I'm going to get up 10 or 15 minutes earlier in the morning and just read positive content. And that started to show up as like blog posts, books, and just short bursts of what I call now like mental nutrition to start the day. That, whether I needed a perspective shift or a practice, or like to learn about, different model or way of living and working and so forth. And what kept coming up, and this is why I'm telling the story, what kept coming up was that all of these people that I was studying were all asking good quality and high quality questions. So I would write those questions down, and it turned into a journaling practice, because I noticed that 100% of these people were journaling. If you expand the definition of journaling to just reflection, because that's all the practice is. It's like we're taking a moment to intentionally think. So I did that for a decade essentially, and I did it digitally for the most part because I was traveling quite a bit in various roles, and eventually grew really frustrated with the digital solutions that were out there to take powerful questions and inspirational content to then guide us into some self-reflection. And that's what the app was, Kyo, KYO, which was at the time I was where I, ended my pharma career was with Otsuka, which was a Japanese pharmaceutical company. And hence there was some inspiration there with the name Kyo, because it's a Japanese word for today. So that's where it all began.
Yeah. Wow. And so, what was your inspiration for, the mental health, where you are now? What sort of inspired you to do this journey, like leaving the app and going where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, so the app was an interesting, let's call it voyage, because it was successful in the sense of, I'd say 80% of that whole project, but it failed financially. And even because we reached a bunch of people. I mean, I essentially was leveraging everything I was learning from brand strategy in the life sciences world, and applied it to launching a tech company and an app. And we reached, nearly 90 million people in the first couple of years without any kind of paid advertising. So it was pretty wild. And I'm grateful for that, but also that number kind of haunts me as well, because I remember, I wasn't leaving my role unhappy. I had this idea to create this app, this offering, and knew I'd regret not trying it. And here it is. It failed financially. That's a whole other podcast topic. But in doing that, there was a lot of pain, obviously, when the decision was made to delete it from the App Store, especially looking at those kind of numbers and thinking, at that time, basically asking all the wrong questions, like how could we fail? And how could I fail at such a colossal level? I mean, most apps don't even reach 1,000 people. And here we reached an incredible amount, and we weren't able to make it work. And my backup plan, or what allowed me to leave a pretty stable career and a career that was, I was on, the track. I mean, I was on the next step was a move to Switzerland, essentially, in my job function. And I left that to try this. And now the backup plan was always, well, if it doesn't work, I'll go back, because, I wasn't leaving on bad terms. But throughout that journey, found the true work that really lit me up. So now all of a sudden going back, I'm like, that doesn't feel right. Like I want to be in this mental fitness space, but how do I stay in it if I just deleted the app and essentially shut down the business? So So there was a lot of pain there. There was, and this is where, thankfully, because of the work, at least I had the practices, and I was interviewed hundreds of people at that point in the space, was able to lean on those practices to cut all of the self-doubt, to cut all of the looping narratives of failure, to cut, or to bring back hope that, hey, there is a path forward, even though it felt like there was nothing and everything was exploding. And eventually got to this realization that the app was just like, it was a product within essentially the brand and the company that I was trying to create. And it was a kind of a stepping off point, which led to the book and rebranding the podcast and essentially what I'm doing now, working with teams and bringing these practices forward. So, even though it was really painful and I questioned it, many times, thankfully, all of the kind of torturous journaling at that time to really get clear in my own mind, brought me to the space of like, I have to continue in this industry, in this world, because there are so many people suffering that I think can be reversed and prevented in the first place. Not everyone, of course. I don't want to generalize, but a vast majority of people, if they had these tools, they're so accessible, they're so simple in the sense of implementing into our rituals and routines that, we don't have to sit in this mental torture day in and day out.
Well, a couple things comes to mind too, listening to you talk, and I've been an entrepreneur for 22 years, right? A long time, and I've owned a couple companies, and when you've got certain products or services, whether you like them or they're not successful, along my journey, the one thing that I've noticed, and to your point, is that there are some things that don't work or that you don't like or enjoy or that aren't as successful that you've got to let go. They run their their lifespan, or they're just not successful, as we talked about. And one thing that you find out from other entrepreneurs or that you learn along the way is that's part of business, right?
Yes.
And you have to be resilient and just let it go. And it's the same as I noticed, in the recruitment business that we're in, is that when people are restructured, right, companies merge and they can't keep everyone because they have duplication, right? It's redundancy. That, it's not personal. It's part of life. And
totally.
I think that's what you're offering. And I'm really excited about, how your mental fitness and things that you're doing with people, because I come across individuals all the time that I'm trying to help, do some of the things I do and what you teach and try to help people with your tools. So, can you expand on some of the tools that you talk about that are simple, that are easy to learn, to implement, that can really help people, both in their businesses or personally, or like what I'm talking about when it's restructured and they don't have those resources. I mean, we've just come out of, a pandemic, and I know everybody's really tired of hearing about it, but I'm here to tell you, I still see people that are really struggling with it, right? They're still working at home. They're, they haven't bounced back. They're struggling with capturing those social skills, right? All kinds of things are still happening. Can you speak to what it is that you do that help people?
Yeah. Well, so a few things, because I mean, this is why I was excited for this conversation. I know we were going to have a good energy connection on this one. So firstly, when it comes to that, whether it's restructured or shifting or business not working or product not working, what I've noticed in retrospect, what caused the pain and what I feel like most people struggle most with is when you attach your sense, your identity to that function. Or for me, it was like 3.5 years, 4 years of building this product that, it wasn't just me pitching investors for money. It was pitching the family for the support to like, hey, trust me, we're onto something, we're building this. And then next thing, it's gone. And if it was just this, okay, that's fine, it's just a blip, it's just a product, I think it would have been easier to let go of that. But when you attach your identity to it, that's when it gets really tough. And I learned that lesson, and I made sure when I launched the book that that wasn't the same thing. I mean, the objective when I was publishing the book was just to be very present in all the interviews and any of the interactions I was having, and not attaching all these expectations to it. So I think that, that's one thing, is just even to acknowledge, something happens, because there is, I mean, I feel it too, Linda. I mean, especially with the teams, like, I think we went through this wild time in history where a lot of people were forced into some serious soul searching and reflection, and that surfaced some, it's surface data or insight, and then people were just thrown back into the mix without any tools. It's like, okay, and then you have all this varying, degree of, okay, so this office is back full time, this office is hybrid, this office is
Yeah.
no longer exists,
Yeah.
and there's just, we don't do well, I think, just as humans, with a whole bunch of uncertainty and sense of, well, like, where are my colleagues at with this mentally? Like, I'm here, but no one's really talking about it, and so forth, right? And then that just continues to pack the minds with emotional debt and mental clutter and all of this stuff, that if we don't, at least individually, because this is what we can control individually, take some time, and I'm just talking minutes, to ask some questions and check in with ourselves in the morning, for example, right? When your first cup of coffee is brewing, or your tea is steeping, or your first cup of water, like, take a look at what you're doing day in and day out, and just inject some check-in questions. Like, how do I feel today? One word. I feel a little bit, stressed or anxious. Well, where do you feel that? Where do I feel that in my body? And often just even identifying where you feel it releases the emotion. But at least you can then go, well, what's fueling that source of tension or whatever? And the reverse is true too. If, like, I wake up motivated and excited, identify what's fueling that, so you can go back to it when we know that we'll be hit with a low, because it's just inevitable that happens day in and day out. But typically we're, for the most part, kind of on autopilot and aren't checking in like that, and then all of a sudden something does happen, and then our lives professionally and personally blow up in some capacity. It's like, well, how did I get here? Like, how did I miss those signs? Well, it's because we haven't checked in. They're all there, right? So it's those small little micro moments that help. And then the other question, the easiest place to get started, is just to ask yourself, like, what are 5 to 10 practices, rituals, activities that, when I do those things, I know I feel good at the end of them. And that, to me, is the start of putting together your own personalized mental fitness plan. Because I can come and say here, like, hey, get up an hour earlier, meditate, do some breath work, go to the F45 class, like, whatever. But I mean, that works for me right now, but also has evolved over the last 15 years. So it's, it's just to figure out what works for you, and then take a look at that list and just be real honest. Like, take a look at your calendar. How often am I actually doing this? Right. And then just slowly start injecting it in a way that is not this massive scheduling, explosion, because then we just don't do it. It's too much to take in, but just look for those little moments. For me, it's after lunch, take a 10-minute walk. No podcast, no audiobook, no music, just outside. And I leverage that to reset the mind for the afternoon, and it's 10 minutes, right? It doesn't have to be huge, because then what happens is there's two things. If you do this day in and day out, there's some preventative benefits, of course, because you're becoming more and more self-aware, so you can spot when things are coming up. Then you can course correct. You have data, right? But the other thing is, like, just even knowing you have this toolkit, when stuff does go, or blow up, or you have a conversation that is, sends you down an emotional track where there's fear, there's anxiety, there's anger, whatever it is, or you are restructured in a situation, that you don't have to sit in that grief, or you don't have to sit in that pain and anger all day. It's not about masking emotions, like, acknowledge they're there, but you can go to that list and be like, okay, I can reset my mind with any one of those things. And that often gives people a lot of, at least for me, gives confidence that, hey, I'm equipped, right? Just like we equip our sales professionals or marketing executives, like here's how you do a brand plan. All right, I have those skills. Here's a selling model that I can use. Oh, I have those skills. But we don't have the skills to control the mastermind that then dictates everything else that we do, right?
Well, it's interesting,
So I get a little passionate.
yeah, when I hear you, I remember going into sales right in the beginning, and Tony Robbins I listened to that for 21 days. Remember his program? Have you ever heard of it?
Oh yeah.
21 days.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that is because I had come from nursing and I went into sales, right? I didn't have any of this stuff that was about that. And I was used to being expert because I had worked in neonatal, orthopedic trauma, ICU, and they train you till the cows come home. You know exactly what you're doing. And they also train you mentally, right? It's not just about the skills. Like you are trained,
for sure,
right? Head to toe on what you're doing. So if, stuff's coming at you, you stay totally calm, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just like you see in the TV shows, actually. So, going into sales, I wanted to be equipped with, they're teaching you about the products, they're teaching you about, sales skills, but, I wanted to be motivated, top performer. I wanted all of that, right? Because I was used to it. And I took his program, and it is about that, right? It's about mindset. It's about planning. And then if you listen to any of his other stuff too, he talks about mindset. He talks about journaling. He talks about meditation. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I've kept all that stuff in the back of my mind. And obviously I've adjusted and done whatever over years. And I do I don't do all of that stuff. I do my stuff. But to your point, people don't do things consistently, and, managing people, when I was medical and then with my company and now working with corporations and companies, what I notice, and I'm sure you do too, and that's probably why they hire you, and they love your stuff, is that you are right. People are doing their marketing, they're doing their leadership. There's so, and I notice it a lot now, because even with recruiting, they hire us to recruit and they're not focused on that. Like, it's like pulling teeth, getting them to book the interviews, pay attention, like call us back. Like, they don't even call back, yet they need to hire. They're all over the map. People need to
they're just going through the motions.
Yes, they're just, it's so different than it was 3-4 years ago. And we're constantly asking ourselves, what is going on? And that's not all of our managers. Like, we've got some that, from head to toe, internally, externally, they've got it going on. And they are ones that have taken programs. They know how mental fitness, they know how to, they've got their vision boards, they how to mental mindset. They do all of that, but that's like 3% of the people. And so other individuals were never taught about looking after themselves so they could look after others, so that they could perform in their roles, right?
Well, that's the key. Well, that's why, like, you if I circle back to one of your original questions, or at the top of the show, of just like why or how you got into this, or why I'm doing what I'm doing now, it's exactly that. It's like, again, I'm not inventing any of these tools or rituals. Like, they've been around since the beginning of time. I see my job is taking those tools and linking them with a relatable narrative that then opens the door to see, okay, I can see that makes sense now for me. And it now it's not friction. Like, this happened the other day, earlier this week. And I do my best to just kind of zoom out and just be, kind and humble. And I'm here when you're ready. But I was working with, and I've worked with this company before, an early stage incubator for startups. And they primarily help founders with their capital raises and so forth. So we were going to do something this month, actually a free mental fitness session and so forth. And they I said, there's a lot of stress with the founders. They're obviously very, stressed around raising money right now. Like the markets are a mess, banks are going crazy, and all this stuff. So we've decided we need to focus on booking more, bringing in more investors for that group. And I said, totally respect your decision. However, and I know I'm biased, you can book all of those sessions, but if all of those founders and their minds are in this, from what you're telling me, in this massive fear state, you're kind of wasting the effort in pitching. Because again, having done this work with KPMG and their startup division, I mean, it was right there. We wrote a whole white paper on this. Like you can't be financially fit and mentally fit. You can't be financially fit without being mentally fit, because you feel it, right? So it's the same thing for really any industry or role. I mean, this, like, and anyone listening, when's the last time you had a fantastic idea and you felt great about whatever project you're working on? What comes after that. Like the right people start showing up. It's like, oh, all of a sudden a budget unlocks and so forth. And we all have experienced the reverse, where we're stressed, we wake up, we're like, I just need to get through the day. I don't see the path here. And it's just like up against the wall, right?
Absolutely.
And this is what I mean. Like, we don't have to be in that state. I know we've been kind of conditioned from society in general just for output and to be productive. And that feels like it's productive, that they're calling you and say, okay, we need the number of candidates. Let's just like go for it without really thinking, like just slowing down to think a little bit. And I see it in the same way with culture in general, especially the tech companies. Like, okay, we'll try to bring out the crew, and we'll buy them these, school bags and, notebooks and pens and water bottles and take them into a national park. And hopefully that'll fix our culture, and people will be motivated. And it's just like, it doesn't work. It's good in the moment, but like, we've got to stop and just think a little bit, right? Ask some questions. What's the source? Like, what's the root problem here?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because like we as well won't engage until they're ready to really, be in that mindset. And, it's to your point. If you think bad things are going to happen, bad things are going to happen. If you think great things are going to happen, bring it on. The world is your oyster. And I'm a firm believer in that. And, the same as, if a company thinks that their team is great and their product's great, then you put the right resources around, systems, processes, and people, and you'll do great. But it is, to your point, they have to have the right tools. They have to think appropriately. They have to engage right. You can't force a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to be mentally ready. And so I'm a big supporter of what you're doing. And I believe more people, individuals as well as corporations, need to be aware of that and how to help their team. So if you were working with a company, right, and the company thinks, okay, well, we're really struggling with our team, right? They seem to be negative, or we're not getting, any headway. We brought them back into the fold. They're working a couple days a week in the office. The rest is remote, but we're just not getting there. We're really struggling with their overall culture. Is that the kind of call you get?
Yes. And I also get many calls around. I just did this one recently in life sciences. Like, we've got a business review coming up, next week. Can we do some mental fitness prior to the business review? Which is very focused on, okay, this like a performance thing. But I come in and like, sure, no problem. And I'm kind of in a sneaky way, bring them, like, introduce all these practices that will carry on for the rest of the year. So it's, it's like, we'll have a great session today doing the business review, because I've presented those as well myself. I know what you're going to talk about. But the ripple effect of talking about how we can lead our own minds and how we can ensure our minds are working for us instead of against us will continue to, yield results and performance, and will feel good. And I think as humans, we all deserve that. But when companies do come and when there's struggle or culture and whatnot, I mean, probably no surprise to you. I mean, I start firing off a bunch of questions, like what, just again, to get past the surface, like, what is it? Like, what what's everyone really struggling with? And there might be a few themes that are coming up. Like, what's happened? Did you just go through a reorg? Are they uncertain with the path forward? Like, what is it? And let's figure out what's actually going on. And then I can design something that I can pull the right stories again and the narratives. And I think I've mentioned this to you before. Selfishly, it's why I continue to host my show Behind the Human, because every week there's a new narrative. There's a new story that like, oh, that team will resonate with the billionaire, or that team will resonate with the Michelin star chef. You might not think that, but for whatever he or she left, like that's the opener. So marrying up those narratives so that people are at least then open. Oh, well, this is interesting. I never heard about this. Like I'm fascinated by this person or that story. And then all the practices come in and the questions. And I leave them with the in the moment feelings of whether we do some guided breath work together, which is impossible not to feel the effects of that. And I'm talking 3-4 minutes max. Always start the sessions like that. I get people to check in with one word as well. I just saw that there was a company, I'll keep it nameless right now, but a company we'd all know where they just went through a massive reorg, and we spent 40 minutes together. People were checking in with stressed, overwhelmed, uncertain, anxious, and within 40 minutes, and I'm not doing anything earth-shattering here. Again, I'm bringing in some narratives, getting people to try some different practices. At the end, everyone was checking out with excited, calm, at peace, motivated. And like, this is what lights me up, like 40 minutes. And again, it's not, I didn't take you to Tulum and we went on this massive silent retreat. I'm talking about some prompts, a bit of breath work, and then again, stories that make sense and that leave people, I can do this. And this is why I talk about this from the perspective of mental fitness and not mental health, because mental health always feels like I'm pulling myself out of a hole. And mental fitness is more of the umbrella term that includes, yes, mental health and mental resilience and mental performance and mental optimization and emotional regulation, all of that stuff, right? But it feels more motivating that, okay, I can do this. And hey, here are the practices, here are the things that I know work. Like, it's not, I'm not guessing here. I know if I go for a run, I'm going to feel good. Or I know if I take a few minutes after lunch to take a walk around the block, it makes me feel good. Or call someone that, I love, or someone that gives me energy. Like, this works. So, well, let's just do it. Let's feel it right now. So yeah, so it's so accessible.
So when you do that, Marc, like in a situation like the example you just gave, then do you come back in 3 months? Like, how do you sustain that? So, for instance, we were talking about, you were just at 45, or is that what it's called again?
Yeah.
Yeah, 45,
yeah.
got your butt kicked.
Yeah.
So, but, when you go and you do that, you've got to continuously go, right, to get the effects, right? And also build the habit.
Yes.
Keep repeating. So when you go and do that with an organization, how do individuals sustain it? Like, how do you get them to, it gets great, they get that effect, right? But just like I was saying, I did that for 21 days and then I continued to do it, and I continue to do things now. And, it's many years later, I won't tell you how many.
You sure?
But, so how do you help them?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great question. And my goal is never, and maybe this doesn't make sense business wise, but my goal isn't that, you have to hire me on for, 10 years kind of thing. But if we look at science, it does take, there's different studies, but the one I go off of is it takes 66 days to break or form new habits. So we have to do something within that time period. So my approach is typically, let's just do an introduction to what mental fitness is, because I think you mentioned this earlier, and I always have to remind myself too, just to stick to the basics, some simple gratitude stuff. Like, I'm always thinking, my mind is always, okay, I have to deliver the most amount of value and like bring in the latest and the greatest. But most people haven't touched any of this stuff. So simple one word check-in for some people, like, wow, I didn't even know I was feeling like that, right? So the basics, the fundamentals, let's establish, again, some rituals, some routines that make sense for you. So then they have that and they can work on that. They also feel it in the moment. They feel the breath work. They feel the gratitude. Say, okay, wow, I left this session and just that alone, I feel good now. So then typically I try to do 2 or 3 others within that, 3 to 4 month time frame to keep it alive. And to your point, like just start to build like that muscle memory and get going. And then the next step, and this doesn't happen with everyone, but this is the one that I think is probably the most impactful, is to fully integrate the mental fitness within the business. And for me, it's a very simple process. Tell me when you have your regular touch points with your team. You having a sales kickoff in January? Are you having a marketing brand plan, presentation and session in March? Then are you bringing people back in June to, here are the results from Q1. Here's what we're going to do Q2. Are you doing a final push in September? Like, what are those touch points, right? And let's bring some of this stuff back. So A, you keep everything alive, but B, well, when you're going to sit there and present that new plan and you want to get everyone on board, we can ensure their minds are somewhat clear and not looping with all of this emotional debt and all this mental debt that prevents anyone from even listening to what you're saying. So the way I pitch it is for sure, your team's going to feel better. They're going to think better. And, it's an investment in ensuring that what you're trying to get across as an organization and getting everyone on the same page, giving you the highest probability of that working out. And then it's built into the culture, right? And then that's when we see some serious results.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, if you want to build an organization that has a positive mental mindset, it's what and I have read recently, it takes 66 days for something to really become a habit, to have instill those tips of, doing the things that they should do on a regular basis for building mental mindset, relaxation, touch points, doing that within their corporate culture, making it part of what is their organization's commitment to that, right? And also individual.
It's not always just adding too, Linda. It's also taking a look and taking things away that are negative habits that aren't leading. Because to me, again, coming back to the strategy part, it's where are we now and where are we heading, and what we're doing in between, the habits, the systems, business-wise, the strategies, the tactics. Those things are either getting us closer to that destination or pushing us farther away. And it's the same thing with our minds.
Well, and what's interesting is that when I talk to reps, there are certain managers or leaders, leadership can either make you or break you, right? The culture and how people feel. So if it's not positive, actions or communication or things that you're doing, it negatively impacts people. And to your point, that mental fitness. I had a conversation recently with a couple candidates that work for the same company. I won't name anything, but the CEO is the reason they've had over 70% turnover in an organization, right? And nobody's doing anything about it. And the reason being is the lack of value that he has for his people. Mm-hmm. And, he will outwardly communicate on, meetings negatively towards top performers, which doesn't make any sense. Like, why do you do that? Right? It's just, and he talks a lot about himself versus team members that are contributing to the growth of the company. But, that is harmful. And sometimes they're not aware they're doing that, right? It's a personality trait. Nobody's maybe said anything to him. I don't know. But, that's dangerous to the culture and it's negative. So there's certain things that go on in meetings that they don't realize that, threatening people that if you don't make 20%, you're fired, things like that. That's so old school that, that doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah. But I think you raise a good point in the sense of, again, getting to, we have to get to the root cause or the root problem, because like in a situation like that, I could see it being really easy to deflect and say it's not the CEO, and it's I don't know, maybe their targets are higher this year, and that's throwing people off. Which, you can then put this whole plan of action in place to sort that out when, really it's not that. It's communication style and so forth,
Yeah, yes,
right?
for sure.
So
Communication
it's
style and demands that are unrealistic, or
yeah,
that are just, it's been instilled in the company. It's been part of their corporate, culture. It's just been what they've done for 20 years.
yeah,
One company, it's always been 20%. If you don't make 20%, you're out of the company. Like, it's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Especially, you can't control that, right? And every region's different, and there's ebbs and flows of business and what happens, but that's been a standard. That's
Yeah.
just ludicrous, right?
There's a
So
question that can help with that I've noticed that's been
yeah,
helpful for management, well, any of us, frankly, and you can use this for your personal life as well. And it's just, what are we pretending not to know in this situation? And then continue to ask that,
that's an
because
interesting question.
the first thing, the first set of responses will most likely be a little bit surface level, and if we continue, it's kind of the same philosophy of the why question, right? But if we keep asking it, what typically then happens is you start hearing the things that we hear in like the whispers, in the dark corner of the room, that are like, oh yeah, that comes up, a couple times a year type thing, and no, I don't really know where that sits. Usually that's where the source of the issue is, and we ignore it because it's less loud, or maybe it's less measurable than just, hey, you missed your target and it's supposed to be 20% every year type thing. Well, like, what is it? Like, what's going on here? But I mean, you can only do that, and this comes back, I guess, full circle to this. Like, you have to come off autopilot and just pause and see, okay, well, what's happening here, and is what we're doing working? And if not, well, why? Like, what is it?
Yeah, yeah,
Right? And let's do something different. And it's the same, like the easiest way to relate this to a personal example is usually with our health and nutrition. It's like we're all trying to, be healthy in some capacity and whatnot. But, and I'm guilty of this. It's like, I can convince myself that doing F45 is going to get me into peak physical shape, which it will help. But my nutrition is the thing that I have to constantly remind myself, like, well, what I'm putting in my body, is that fueling my health or fueling disease?
right.
Flat out. And that's the answer to my, what am I pretending not to know? Yeah, I'm going to do another F45 so I can eat the whatever, right? That doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so where do you see yourself in the next year or two? Like, what's your journey going to be?
Well, I was hoping you could tell me that, Linda.
Yeah, the career expert here.
Yeah,
I
exactly. Yeah.
could, but I won't.
I
Yeah,
mean, like, I obviously have a direction, let's just say, on where I'd like to go, and the direction is to reach more minds, make sure that these practices are more and more accessible. And the how to that right now, at least, is a mix of these engagements with teams, and I do some one-to-one work, but I'm only one person, obviously, so I try to stick with teams. And then the other side of that, which is evolving into a whole other world, and why I'm kind of, I don't know, we'll see where the path goes, but I'm doing everything possible to practice what I preach, and being as present as possible to see, oh, here's where the opportunity is, and this is maybe bright and shiny lights, but it's not really where I need to go to have the most impact. And that second bucket is around creating content and producing content, i.e. the podcast, but also I've been working on this mental fitness, potentially TV series, original series, around just interviewing really interesting humans. And again, same thing, just providing, hey, anyone can do this. Like, you don't have to be a multi-platinum award-winning musician to tap into this stuff, or billionaire mogul type thing. Like, any of us can do this. So So we'll see. I mean, this is happening live. I mean, we're filming a pilot episode of this next month. I'm heading
Wow,
actually early next week to
for
LA
you.
to talk to a film studio about it as well. So, we'll see where it goes, but it's already led to a whole host of other opportunities around just getting this kind of content out there that usually dovetails back in some capacity to then work with a company or team or individuals and so forth. So
Wow.
yeah, the North Star is clear. The how is open to be shifted and molded in whatever way has the most impact.
Wow, good for you.
Thank
And
you.
when I think about what you do, there's just so many great people out there that just, for whatever reason, didn't have a mentor, never came across a book, a podcast, somebody who has given them the skills or that they've observed, or helped them. Because it's not something that everybody learns, right? It's not,
No,
we learn territory management, organizational skills, like all the things we talked about earlier, but it's just not something we do, and it's not necessarily cool for everybody, right? Like it's
yeah,
not, women have a tendency to move towards, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but a lot
yeah,
of women do meditation and self-reflection and
yeah,
journaling and talking to each other.
yeah,
Emotional quoting, I'm really big into that. I, love emotional quote, emotional intelligence.
hmm
And I believe that, it's a very important for people to be self-aware and have a strong introspection, good interpersonal skills, and, social awareness, all those things that fall under the emotional quoting. And I'm
yeah,
sure you focus a lot of that when you are working with people, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. We use a profile when we're working with our clients that does touch on that, for sales performance or management performance, whatever. And it has emotional quoting in it. But men, unfortunately, didn't get the same opportunity, right? And the younger generation are heads and shoulders above, millennials and above, probably, I'd say. But millennials are pretty good, but above, and obviously baby boomers, struggle a little bit with that because that just wasn't something that
yeah,
was taught to them. So
for sure.
did you notice just, different age groups, or if you notice the difference between men and women in terms of, having to help them, and that there's, more of a tendency that women are very in tune with it, where men are just like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, or I'm not that familiar, or I'm not that comfortable.
Yeah, yeah. So short answer, yes. I mean, and when we were running the app, the one nice thing, well, there were many nice things, but one of the things that often sticks out was the data that we had. And it was our users were 65% female and the balance men. And not surprising, what was very surprising in the way the app worked is we had these different content packs that would lead people into a practice. The by far most popular pack in there was centered around men's work. So you had the majority of the audience or the users female, but that pack was by far used the most. And I find that, quite telling to kind of where we're at. And even myself, I mean, having gone through the entrepreneurial world and having that business explode in many different ways, I guess, positive and negative, that's where I was introduced to a men's group. And I've been part of this one group for 7 years now, and I can't imagine not having that group of men to help emotionally as I was going through not just the business, but even, kind of a traumatic birth of our second son, all of that stuff. And that's being talked about a little bit more and more. We're not there yet. So where I see the opportunity, and I keep coming back to this, but it's meeting men with the right narrative. Because again, when I default back to anyone that I've studied for my book or anyone I'm studying on the podcast, they're all doing this stuff. They're all doing something for their mind. So it's just pulling the right narrative. I naturally work way better with women, or I shouldn't say better. it's easier. Let's just say, I feel like we start at step 3 instead of, step 1. But with that being said, I mean, for me, I enjoy it because it's I am a man as well, so I understand. But then it just gives me a little bit of more of a challenge of like, okay, what's the opening narrative that's going to make this work, and how can I? It's the same thing with sales functions. Like when you're going into see your customer, like what is the real objective for that customer? You have to uncover that, right? So it's the same thing with this work. Like what is going to resonate with them? And that, may not happen, in one call or one session. But the more questions you ask and the more present I can be and get them in the same place, then all of a sudden you start uncovering, okay, here are the drivers, here are the motivators. And then you start seeing that on their side as well. It's like, oh, wow, I'm basically doing the same thing in my work as well now. And everyone's more present, more self-aware, and, tapping into this whole other world of what I call like an expanded possibility. You start seeing stuff that's always been there, but like now there's a pathway. It's like you've organized your mind in a neatly organized library versus like pushing the bookshelves over and having to try to find the one book or one piece of knowledge that you're seeking. So we're getting there, and part of the reason why, I try to do as many of these kind of conversations as possible just to get it out there, and why there's a whole bucket in my own business around, this original series or podcasts and all these other content mediums, because we just need to, we're at the point where thankfully we've had a lot of discussion around mental health and people being vulnerable enough to talk about it. And it's taken probably a decade plus to get there. What's the next wave and where I see things going because of what we're feeling is we have to talk about, well, now what? What are the tools? People are desperately seeking the tools. Yeah.
Well, so we don't get to that tipping point, right? I think what you're doing, and I really respect it a lot, is you're helping people really optimize their potential and really manage themselves effectively so they have a full life, right?
Yes.
And I think that's, be present, like you've used that word a few times, to be present and both professionally and personally, and really feel engaged with themselves, right?
Yeah.
And the way that you do that, you have to have tools, like, and you have to, plan, like you talked about planning things, right? Planning your life. And, it's funny, my husband and my son are away on a golf trip.
Okay.
I have 3 sons. 2 of them don't live here anymore. They're grown and they've got their thing going on. And so my younger son and my husband are here and they're golfing. So I have all this, I have a week to do all these things that I want to do. And it's planning, right? So I plan on a regular basis. Plus I have a planner that is my monthly and my daily and my weekly, right? But I'm doing all my planning and my sticky notes. And I was reading about you and your sticky notes and stuff. And so I was like, oh my God, we're so similar. But so I'm very excited about that because I love doing that stuff. And I go for my walk at 11 o'clock and I do all these things. So, it helps. And if you don't have that stuff, and then I check back every once in a while about, are these the things that I want to do? And, are they getting me where I want to go, both personally and professionally? And if you don't do that, make those checkpoints. And, my husband and I plan those things together too, so that we're aligned, right? But this week now is just me stepping back and focusing on, work and my podcast. I have a YouTube channel and all of that. And some other things that I want to do just like you, right? So, I respect a lot what you're doing, and I really hope that you get to help lots of people because that's,
thank you.
Your journey. So, speaking of which, how do people, like your podcast, where do they find that? As well as, how do they reach you if they want to work with you, corporately or personally? What's the best way?
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll put links, of course,
sure,
with the podcast here, but just if you could tell people.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll keep it really simple. There's one link that essentially has it all, and it's behindthehuman.com. And that's also the name of the podcast. but there you'll see the book, you'll see the socials. There's easy ways to get in touch. There's stuff there for teams as well. You mentioned Tony Robbins as well. So if you go to behindthehuman.com/tools, I've only written one bonus chapter from Personal Socrates, and it's on Tony Robbins, and it's all focused on morning priming practices and rituals and getting you started. So if you go to tools, there's a bunch of free stuff there to get you started. And yes, I'm accessible, and I'd love to know. Shoot me the questions and the practices that have helped you, and let's if you do that on social, tag me, because I'll reshare it, because guaranteed there's someone else that can benefit from that question or practice in the moment, and the ripple effect of us all sharing that together now goes from just you to thousands of people. So let's just kind of rise up together as a community and help each other out, because we're all human. We're all going through this ride of life, and it can be a really beautiful experience.
That's great. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate you being a guest, Marc, and you shared lots of information, and most importantly, hopefully you can help someone, one of our guests or many guests actually. That would be great. Thank you.